The sun beat down mercilessly on Nathan Cole's broad shoulders as he pushed the lawnmower across his impeccably manicured lawn. Sweat trickled down his face, but a smile played on his lips. This house, this lawn, they were his. A testament to how far he'd come. Behind the pristine white curtains of the house next door, trouble was brewing. Evelyn Matthews peered through a gap in the fabric, her lips pursed into a thin line. "Daryl," she called to her husband, who was engrossed in his newspaper. "Come look at this." Daryl sighed, setting down his paper. "What is it now, Evelyn?" "There's a black man mowing the Johnsons' lawn. I thought they moved out last month." "Maybe the new owners hired him," Daryl suggested, already losing interest. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "On a Saturday? In clothes like that?" She shook her head. "No, something's not right." Outside, Nathan paused to wipe his brow, surveying his work with pride. He'd moved to this upscale neighborhood hoping for peace, a refuge from the constant battles he fought in his professional life. But even here, he felt the weight of judgmental stares. A door slammed, and Nathan looked up to see a woman marching towards him, phone in hand. His stomach clenched, recognizing the look in her eyes, one he'd seen far too many times before. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her voice sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" Nathan straightened, forcing a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm just taking care of my lawn." The woman, Evelyn, scoffed. "Your lawn? I don't think so. The Johnsons lived here and they most certainly weren't." She cut herself off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "The Johnsons moved out last month," Nathan explained, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "My wife and I bought the house. We moved in last week." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you. I'm calling the police." Nathan's heart raced, but he kept his composure. "Ma'am, that's really not necessary. I can show you my ID." But Evelyn had already turned away, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report a suspicious person." Nathan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He'd faced situations like this before, but never at his own home. This was supposed to be his sanctuary. Within minutes, a police cruiser pulled up, and two officers stepped out. The older one, a weathered man with salt and pepper hair, approached first. His nameplate read Carter. "Good morning, sir," Officer Carter said, his tone neutral. "We received a call about a suspicious person. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Nathan nodded, his jaw tight. "Of course, officer." The younger officer, a Latina woman whose nameplate read Lopez, hung back, her eyes darting between Nathan and Evelyn, who stood triumphantly on her lawn. "Can you tell me what you're doing here?" Carter asked. "I live here," Nathan replied calmly. "My wife and I just moved in last week." Carter's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Do you have any identification on you?" Nathan nodded, reaching slowly for his wallet. "Of course. It's right here." As he handed over his ID, Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. "He must have stolen it. There's no way he could afford to live here." Officer Lopez frowned, turning to Evelyn. "Ma'am, please let us handle this." Carter examined the ID, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Cole, this address matches the one on your license. But given the circumstances, would you mind if we verify your ownership?" Nathan's stomach churned, but he nodded. "Go ahead, officer. I have nothing to hide." As Carter radioed in the information, more neighbors began to gather. Nathan felt their stares, heard their whispers. He stood tall, refusing to let them see how much this was affecting him. "So," Evelyn sneered, emboldened by the growing crowd, "how exactly did you manage to afford a house in this neighborhood? Surely not on a gardener's salary." Nathan's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice remained level. "I'm not a gardener, ma'am. I'm an entrepreneur and philanthropist. I founded a non-profit organization dedicated to racial justice and police reform." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Evelyn's eyes widened, but she quickly recovered. "I've never heard of you. What's this so-called organization?" Before Nathan could respond, Officer Carter's radio crackled to life. He listened intently, his expression shifting from neutral to surprised, then to something akin to respect. "Mr. Cole," Carter said, his tone markedly different. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Your ownership has been confirmed, and—" He paused, glancing at his partner. "Well, it seems we should have recognized you, sir. Your work is quite well known in law enforcement circles." A hush fell over the crowd. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Nathan nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your professionalism." Officer Lopez stepped forward, her eyes kind. "Mr. Cole, would you like to file a complaint about this incident?" Nathan considered it for a moment, then shook his head. "No, thank you. I believe this has been a misunderstanding." He turned to face Evelyn, his gaze steady. "I hope we can move past this and be good neighbors." Evelyn sputtered, her face flushing red. But you can't possibly. This must be some kind of mistake." "The only mistake here," Officer Carter said firmly, "was your unfounded accusation, ma'am." As the officers prepared to leave, a gust of wind knocked over a garden gnome in Nathan's yard. The ceramic shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. Evelyn, desperate to salvage her dignity, pointed accusingly. "See, he's destroying property. Arrest him." Nathan moved to clean up the broken pieces, but Evelyn blocked his path. "Don't you dare touch anything. This is a crime scene." "Ma'am," Officer Lopez warned, "step back. Mr. Cole has every right to be on his property." But Evelyn was beyond reason. She shoved Nathan, her voice shrill. "Get out. You don't belong here." Nathan stumbled back, shock and anger warring on his face. The crowd gasped. Phones appeared, recording the unfolding drama. Officer Carter quickly stepped between them. "That's enough. Ma'am, you're bordering on assault. I suggest you return to your home immediately." Evelyn, realizing she'd gone too far, retreated a few steps. But her eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and defiance. "This isn't over," she hissed. Nathan, composing himself, straightened his shirt. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's not over, but not in the way you think." He turned to address the gathered neighbors, his voice carrying across the once peaceful street. "I moved here hoping to find a community, a place where my wife and I could build a life, maybe start a family. I never expected to be treated like a criminal in my own yard." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces, some ashamed, others curious, a few still hostile. "But this is why I do the work I do. This is why we need change. And I invite all of you to be part of that change." A murmur went through the crowd. Some nodded, others looked away uncomfortably. Evelyn stood frozen, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. Officer Carter cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, if you change your mind about filing a complaint, please don't hesitate to contact us." Nathan nodded, then turned back to his lawn. "Thank you, officers, but right now I have a yard to finish." As he gripped the lawnmower's handle, a quiet voice spoke up. "Mr. Cole." It was one of the neighbors, an elderly woman who'd watched the entire scene unfold. I'm sorry. Would you like some lemonade when you're done? Maybe we could chat, get to know each other better." A small smile tugged at Nathan's lips. "I'd like that very much, ma'am. Thank you." As the crowd slowly dispersed and the police cruiser pulled away, Nathan resumed mowing his lawn. The sun still beat down, the work was still hard, but something had shifted. In the face of prejudice, he'd stood his ground with dignity. And in doing so, he'd planted a seed of change in his new community. The road ahead would be challenging, but Nathan Cole was no stranger to adversity. He'd face ahead on one lawn, one neighbor, one small act of kindness at a time. The revelation of Nathan's identity sent ripples through the gathered crowd. Whispers erupted, phones appeared, and the atmosphere crackled with a newfound tension. Evelyn Matthews, her face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment, refused to back down. "This is preposterous," she spat, her voice rising. "There's no way he could afford to live here. It must be some kind of mistake." Officer Carter's brow furrowed. "Ma'am, we've confirmed Mr. Cole's identity and his ownership of this property. There's no mistake." Evelyn's eyes darted wildly, searching for support. But he can't possibly. I mean, look at him." Nathan stood tall, his jaw clenched. The weight of years fighting against such prejudice pressed down on him, threatening to crack his composure. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice low and controlled, "I understand this might be difficult for you to accept, but I assure you, I am the rightful owner of this home. My wife and I worked hard to get here, and we have every right to live in this neighborhood." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Evelyn's husband, Darrell, emerged from their house, looking bewildered. "Evelyn, what's going on? Why are the police here?" Before Evelyn could respond, a gust of wind swept through the yard, knocking over a ceramic garden gnome. The sound of shattering pottery cut through the tension like a gunshot. Nathan instinctively moved to clean up the broken pieces, but Evelyn lunged forward, blocking his path. "Don't touch anything," she shrieked. "This is evidence. He's destroying property." Officer Lopez stepped between them, her hand raised. "Ma'am, please step back. Mr. Cole has every right to tend to his own property." The crowd pressed closer, phones raised high, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Nathan felt the weight of their stares, the judgment in their eyes. He'd faced prejudice before, but never so publicly, never in what was supposed to be his sanctuary. "I think I'd like to go inside now," Nathan said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. As he turned towards his house, Evelyn darted in front of him, arms outstretched. "You're not going anywhere. I want to see more proof. How do we know you didn't forge those documents?" Nathan's patience was wearing thin. "Mrs. Matthews, I've cooperated fully with the police. I've shown my ID, confirmed my ownership. What more do you want from me?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I want you out of our neighborhood. You don't belong here." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Officer Carter stepped forward, his face stern. "That's enough, Mrs. Matthews. You're bordering on harassment now." Nathan closed his eyes, fighting to maintain his composure. When he opened them, he fixed Evelyn with a steady gaze. "Mrs. Matthews, I understand you're upset, but your prejudice is showing, and it's not a good look on you or this community." A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. Evelyn's face contorted with fury and embarrassment. "How dare you? I'm not prejudiced. I'm just protecting our neighborhood." "From what exactly?" Nathan asked, his voice calm but firm. "From a law-abiding citizen who happens to be black? From someone who's worked hard to achieve success? Or is it simply the idea that your worldview might be challenged?" Evelyn sputtered, unable to form a coherent response. Her husband, Darrell, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Evelyn, maybe we should go inside and calm down." She shrugged him off violently. "No, I won't let them make me out to be the villain here." As the situation escalated, Officer Carter pulled Nathan aside. "Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. I should have recognized you earlier. Your work with the Racial Justice Reform Initiative is well known in law enforcement circles." Nathan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're familiar with our work?" Carter nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Yes, sir. Your organization has been instrumental in pushing for better training and accountability in police departments across the country. It's an honor to meet you, actually." The sudden shift in Carter's demeanor wasn't lost on the crowd. Whispers intensified, and Evelyn's face paled as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Why are you being so friendly with him now?" Officer Lopez stepped forward, her voice clear and professional. "Mrs. Matthews, Mr. Cole, is not only the legitimate owner of this property, but also a highly respected figure in the field of racial justice and police reform. His work has had a significant impact on law enforcement practices nationwide." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered neighbors. Some looked ashamed, others curious, and a few still clung to their suspicions. Evelyn, desperate to salvage her reputation, attempted to backpedal. "Well, I had no idea. But you can understand my concern, can't you? We've never had. I mean, this neighborhood has always been white." Nathan finished for her, his voice tinged with sadness. "Mrs. Matthews, I moved here hoping to find a community where my wife and I could build a life, where we could raise children free from the prejudices that have plagued our society for far too long. But it seems those prejudices have followed us here." A hush fell over the crowd. Nathan's words hung in the air, heavy with truth and disappointment. Suddenly, another neighbor stepped forward. It was the elderly woman who had offered Nathan lemonade earlier. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice quavering but determined, "I want to apologize. Not just for today, but for the way this neighborhood has behaved. We've been so caught up in protecting what we have that we forgot what it means to be truly welcoming." Her words seemed to break a dam. Other neighbors began to step forward, offering apologies and words of support. The tide was turning, and Evelyn found herself increasingly isolated. As the situation de-escalated, Nathan felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over him. He turned to the officers. "Thank you for your professionalism today. I think I'd like to go inside now, if that's all right." Officer Lopez nodded. "Of course, Mr. Cole. Again, we apologize for the inconvenience. If you'd like to file a complaint about this incident, we can take your statement." Nathan considered for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I don't think that will be necessary. Sometimes, the best way to combat prejudice is through education and understanding. Maybe this can be a learning opportunity for all of us." As Nathan turned to walk into his house, Evelyn made one last desperate attempt. "Wait, you can't just. This isn't over." Nathan paused at his doorstep, turning to face her and the crowd. "You're right, Mrs. Matthews. It's not over. In fact, it's just beginning. I invite all of you to attend an open house at my nonprofit next weekend. Come learn about the work we do, and let's start building the kind of community we all want to live in, one of mutual respect, understanding, and growth." With that, Nathan entered his home, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As the crowd began to disperse, the whispers started again, but this time they were different. There was shame, yes, but also curiosity, and perhaps even a glimmer of hope. Inside, Nathan leaned against the closed door, finally allowing the emotions of the day to wash over him. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone to call his wife, Lisa. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You're not going to believe what just happened." As Nathan recounted the events to Lisa, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the injustice he'd faced, sadness at the persistence of such prejudices, but also a renewed determination. This incident, as painful as it was, had opened a door. It was an opportunity to bring about real change, right here in his own backyard. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Evelyn retreated to her house, her world shaken to its core. Other neighbors gathered in small groups, discussing what they'd witnessed and what it meant for their community. And in the middle of it all, a broken garden gnome lay forgotten on the lawn, a small but poignant reminder of how easily things can shatter, and how, with care and understanding, they might be put back together again. The murmurs of the crowd grew to a crescendo, a cacophony of whispers and pointed fingers. Nathan Cole stood at the center of it all, a rock in a turbulent sea of judgment and shifting allegiances. The weight of the community's attention bore down on him, threatening to crack his carefully maintained composure. Evelyn Matthews, her face a mask of desperation, clung to the last vestiges of her crumbling authority. "This is absurd," she spat, her voice shrill. "How can you all be so easily fooled?" Officer Lopez stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "Mrs. Matthews, I think it's time we address the nature of your initial call. Given what we've learned about Mr. Cole, we need to consider whether your complaint was racially motivated." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's eyes widened in panic. "Racially motivated? That's preposterous. I was simply concerned about our neighborhood's safety." Nathan, his jaw clenched, finally spoke. Safety from what, exactly? From a black man owning a home. From someone who doesn't fit your narrow view of who belongs here. The tension in the air was palpable. Phones were raised higher, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Nathan felt exposed, raw, as if every pair of eyes was peeling back layers of his hard-earned success, questioning his very right to exist in this space. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos. "I've had enough of this nonsense." It was Gerald Thompson, another neighbor who had initially sided with Evelyn. He pushed his way through the crowd, his face red with anger. "Listen here, Cole. I don't care who you claim to be or what fancy organization you run. You don't belong here, and we don't want your kind in our neighborhood." A hush fell over the gathering. Nathan felt a surge of anger course through him, but he took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was the moment that would define everything. How he responded, how he carried himself in the face of such blatant racism. "Mr. Thompson," Nathan began, his voice low and controlled, "I understand that change can be difficult. But my kind, as you put it, are human beings deserving of respect and equal treatment. We are your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers. We are your neighbors, whether you like it or not." Gerald sneered. "Don't lecture me about equality. You people always play the race card when things don't go your way." Nathan stood taller, his eyes locked on Gerald's. "The race card? Is that what you call it when we demand the basic dignity that you take for granted? When we ask not to be judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement with Nathan, others averting their eyes in shame. Officer Carter stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Thompson. One more comment like that, and we'll be having a very different conversation." As Gerald backed down, muttering under his breath, a strange quiet settled over the scene. It was as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Evelyn, sensing the tide turning against her, made a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice suddenly saccharine, I may have overreacted earlier. You must understand, we've never had. I mean, this neighborhood has always been white." Nathan finished for her, his tone tinged with sadness. "Mrs. Matthews, I moved here hoping to find community where my wife and I could build a life, where we could raise children free from the prejudices that have plagued our society for far too long. But it seems those prejudices have followed us here." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Nathan's words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the work still to be done, the battles still to be fought. Suddenly, Officer Lopez's radio crackled to life. She listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to grim determination. "Mrs. Matthews," she said, turning to face Evelyn, "we've just received some interesting information about a series of similar calls you've made in the past. It seems this isn't the first time you've reported suspicious individuals who turned out to be people of color simply going about their business." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered neighbors. Evelyn's face paled, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. That's not, you can't prove." She stammered, but the damage was done. Nathan watched as the last of Evelyn's supporters turned away from her, shame and disgust evident on their faces. He felt no joy in her downfall, only a deep sadness at the pervasiveness of such prejudice. As the situation reached its boiling point, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Evelyn, that's enough." All eyes turned to Darrell Matthews, Evelyn's husband, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal. He stepped forward, his face a mix of disappointment and resolve. "I've stood by for too long, watching you judge and discriminate against people simply because of the color of their skin," Darrell said, his voice shaking slightly. "I was wrong to remain silent, and I won't do it anymore." Evelyn stared at her husband in disbelief. "Darrell, what are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time for us to take a long, hard look at ourselves," Darrell replied. "Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for every time I've stayed quiet in the face of injustice." The crowd murmured in surprise. Nathan, caught off guard by this unexpected ally, nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Your words mean more than you know." As the tension began to dissipate, Officer Carter cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, given the circumstances, we'd like to take a formal statement from you regarding this incident. And Mrs. Matthews, we'll need to speak with you as well about your history of potentially discriminatory calls." Evelyn, her world crumbling around her, could only nod mutely. The neighborhood that once looked up to her now saw her for what she truly was, and she stood alone in a sea of disapproving faces. Nathan, feeling the weight of moment, made a decision that would surprise everyone, himself included. "Officers," he said, "while I appreciate your diligence, I don't think pressing charges is the answer here." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Even Evelyn looked up in shock. "Mr. Cole," Officer Lopez began, "are you sure? What Mrs. Matthews did was—" "Wrong," Nathan finished for her. "It was wrong, hurtful, and born out of ignorance and fear. But retribution isn't the answer. Education is." He turned to face the gathered neighbors, his voice strong and clear. "This incident, painful as it is, presents an opportunity for growth, for understanding, for real change. I'd like to invite all of you, yes, including you, Mrs. Matthews, to an open house at my nonprofit next weekend. Come learn about the work we do, about the realities of racial injustice, and let's start building the kind of community we all want to live in, one of mutual respect, understanding, and growth." The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. Voices murmured in agreement. Even Gerald Thompson, who had been so vehemently opposed earlier, looked thoughtful. Evelyn, tears streaming down her face, stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, I don't deserve your kindness, but if you're willing to give all of us, a chance to learn and do better, I'd like to take it." Nathan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "That's all any of us can do, Mrs. Matthews. Learn, grow, and do better." As the crowd began to disperse, a sense of possibility hung in the air. The neighborhood had been shaken to its core, old prejudices exposed and challenged. But in that challenge lay the seeds of transformation. Nathan watched as his neighbors walked away, talking in small groups, some already making plans to attend the open house. He felt a mix of exhaustion and hope wash over him. This day, which had started with such promise and devolved into such pain, had ended with a glimmer of something powerful, the potential for real change. As he turned to finally enter his home, Nathan caught sight of the broken garden gnome, still lying forgotten on his lawn. He bent to pick up the pieces, a metaphor not lost on him. Sometimes, things needed to break apart before they could be put back together, stronger and more beautiful than before. Inside, he found Lisa waiting, her eyes full of concern and love. "I saw everything from the window," she said, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Are you okay?" Nathan held his wife close, letting out a long, shaky breath. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I think we might have just taken the first step towards something important." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Nathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, full of difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. But it was a road worth traveling, one small step at a time, one changed heart at a time. Outside, the sun began to set on a neighborhood forever altered. The perfectly manicured lawns and pristine facades now held a different meaning, a reminder that true beauty comes not from uniformity, but from the rich tapestry of diverse lives woven together in understanding and respect. The days following the confrontation on Nathan Cole's lawn were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. The neighborhood, once a bastion of quiet affluence, now buzzed with hushed conversations and furtive glances. Evelyn Matthews found herself at the center of a storm she had unwittingly unleashed, her carefully cultivated image crumbling like sand in a tempest. Nathan stood in his study, gazing out at the manicured lawns that now seemed to hold a different meaning. The phone on his desk buzzed incessantly, a constant reminder of the world beyond his window. Local news outlets, civil rights organizations, and even national media were clamoring for his story. Lisa entered the room, her presence a balm to Nathan's frayed nerves. "How are you holding up?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Nathan leaned into her embrace, letting out a long sigh. I'm not sure. Part of me wants to use this moment, to turn it into something meaningful. But another part just wants to retreat, to find the peace we came here for in the first place." Lisa nodded, understanding etched in her features. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember why we started the foundation in the first place. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought right where we live." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Nathan and Lisa exchanged a glance before heading downstairs. Opening the door, they found Officer Carter standing on their porch, his expression a mix of discomfort and determination. "Mr. Cole," Carter began, removing his hat, "I wanted to come by personally to apologize for how things were handled the other day. I should have done better." Nathan studied the officer's face, seeing genuine remorse. "Thank you, Officer Carter. Your apology means a lot. But if you really want to make a difference, there are better ways than just saying sorry." Carter nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's actually why I'm here. I was hoping to talk to you about implementing some of your training programs in our department. If you're willing, of course." A small smile tugged at Nathan's lips. "I think that's a conversation worth having. Why don't you come in?" As Nathan and Officer Carter discussed potential reforms, the neighborhood continued its own process of soul-searching. Daryl Matthews, unable to reconcile with his wife's actions, had moved out temporarily, leaving Evelyn alone with the consequences of her prejudice. The day of the open house at Nathan's non-profit arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. The community center bustled with activity as neighbors, curious onlookers, and even a few local reporters filed in. Nathan stood at the podium, his heart racing, but his resolve firm. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "I want to thank you all for coming today. What happened in our neighborhood last week was painful, but it also presented an opportunity for growth, for understanding, and for real change." As Nathan spoke about the work of his foundation, the challenges faced by communities of color, and the importance of empathy and education, he saw faces in the crowd shift from skepticism to interest, and in some cases to shame. "We can't change the past," Nathan continued, his voice gaining strength. "But we can shape our future. It starts with conversations like this, with being willing to listen and learn from each other." As he concluded his speech, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn Matthews, looking pale and diminished, made her way to the front of the room. The audience parted, whispers following in her wake. "Mr. Cole," Evelyn said, her voice quavering, "I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve your kindness or your forgiveness. But I couldn't stay away. I needed to face what I've done, to face you, and to say how deeply, truly sorry I am." A hush fell over the room as Evelyn continued, tears streaming down her face. "I've spent my whole life thinking I knew what was right, what was proper. But all I've done is cause pain and perpetuate injustice. I can't undo what I've done, but I want to learn. I want to do better." Nathan felt the weight of the moment, the eyes of the community upon him. His response would set the tone, not just for his relationship with Evelyn, but for the neighborhood's path forward. He stepped down from the podium, approaching Evelyn with measured steps. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "thank you for coming today and for your apology. You're right. You can't undo what's been done, but recognizing the need for change is the first step towards making it happen." Nathan extended his hand. "If you're truly committed to learning and growing, then welcome. That's what today is all about." Evelyn, with trembling fingers, took Nathan's hand. The simple gesture, captured by dozens of phone cameras, would become a powerful symbol in the days to come. As the event continued, Nathan found himself in conversation after conversation, each one an opportunity to bridge divides and challenge preconceptions. He spoke with Gerald Thompson, the neighbor who had verbally attacked him, now sheepishly asking about volunteer opportunities at the foundation. Officer Lopez approached, a smile on her face. Mr. Cole, I just wanted to say, what you're doing here, it's incredible. I've already signed up for one of your workshops on community policing. As the day wound down, Nathan felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time since moving to the neighborhood, he felt a sense of real possibility. Lisa joined him as the last of the attendees filed out. "You did it," she said, squeezing his hand. "You turned something ugly into something beautiful." Nathan nodded, a weary smile on his face. "We did it, all of us. It's just the beginning, but it's a start." As they locked up the community center, Nathan caught sight of a familiar figure across the street. Darryl Matthews stood there, uncertainty written across his features. Nathan raised a hand in greeting, and after a moment's hesitation, Darryl returned the gesture. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood underwent a subtle but profound transformation. The once pristine facades now bore signs promoting community events and social justice initiatives. Evelyn, true to her word, became a regular volunteer at Nathan's foundation, her journey of education and redemption a testament to the power of confronting one's biases. Officer Carter, with Nathan's guidance, implemented new training programs at the police department, focusing on de-escalation techniques and community engagement. The impact rippled out beyond their neighborhood, catching the attention of departments in neighboring cities. One sunny Saturday, almost a month to the day after the initial confrontation, Nathan once again found himself mowing his lawn. But this time, as he pushed the mower across the grass, he was joined by a small army of neighbors, each tending to their own yards or offering help where needed. As Nathan paused to wipe his brow, he caught sight of Evelyn emerging from her house, a tray of lemonade in her hands. She made her way down the street, offering drinks to the gathered neighbors, her steps hesitant but determined. When she reached Nathan, their eyes met, a world of unspoken understanding passing between them. "Lemonade," Evelyn offered, her voice soft. Nathan nodded, accepting the glass. "Thank you, Mrs. Matthews." As they stood there, surrounded by the buzz of lawnmowers and the chatter of neighbors, Nathan felt a sense of peace wash over him. He turned to the gathered community, raising his glass in a toast. "You know," he said, his voice carrying across the lawns, "sometimes the biggest victories are the ones that happen in our own backyard." A chorus of agreement rose from the neighbors, glasses clinking in the afternoon sun. As Nathan looked out at the faces, black, white, young, old, newcomers and longtime residents alike, he saw not just a neighborhood, but a community. One forever changed by a single act of prejudice, but more importantly, by the courage to confront it, learn from it, and grow beyond it. The perfectly manicured lawns of their affluent enclave now stood as a testament not to exclusivity, but to inclusivity. Each blade of grass, each carefully tended flower, a reminder that true beauty comes not from uniformity, but from the rich tapestry of diverse lives growing together in harmony. As the day wound down and neighbors retreated to their homes, Nathan and Lisa stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the sun set on their transformed community. The journey had been painful, the lessons hard won, but the result was a neighborhood forever altered, not just in appearance, but in heart and spirit. Nathan smiled, feeling for the first time that he had truly found home. "Sometimes," he murmured, echoing his earlier words, "the biggest changes start right where we live." Lisa squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. "And sometimes," she added, "the most important work we do is right in our own backyard." As twilight settled over the neighborhood, the echoes of laughter and conversation still lingering in the air, Nathan and Lisa turned to go inside, leaving behind a community forever changed by one man's dignity in the face of prejudice, and the collective courage to grow beyond it.